A few hours from now, Prime Minister Mark Carney will be addressing leaders at Davos as Canadian troops are waiting for his okay before heading into Greenland. For more on Canada's role in these escalating tensions, we're joined this morning by Christian Leuprecht. He's a professor at Queen's University's Royal Military College of Canada. Good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, Anne-Marie.
I want to start with the very latest. The Globe and Mail reporting this morning that Canadian Armed Forces have modeled a hypothetical U.S. military invasion of Canada. Now, this all comes as the Prime Minister is weighing sending troops to Greenland. What's at stake for Canada as tensions and rhetoric heat up from all players, the U.S., Greenland, NATO members, and Canada?
Well, ultimately, we got to play ahead, right? So the first and foremost job of any government is to protect the security and sovereignty of the country, political, economic, social, and we haven't been very good at playing ahead in recent years. And so it shows that the government, as well as its institutions of statecraft, are finally at the job that we ultimately want them as taxpayers to do. That includes, of course, the Canadian Armed Forces modeling any number of threats to the country, because ultimately those instruments of statecraft, whether it's Global Affairs Canada, Canadian Armed Forces, need to be able to respond to a mandate they might be given from the Government of Canada, and that so means preparing for any of the eventualities that might come with the very moderate assets that we have. And that's, of course, also at stake in the decision, do we send troops to Greenland? What does that capability look like, and the assets? Because we've been underfunding, understaffing, and undercapitalizing that organization, so it limits the government's ability now to respond in this very volatile and competitive world.
Well, that is my next question. Do we have the manpower if that situation is not hypothetical? And if not, where could it come from?
So I'm assuming you're referring to the manpower with regards to the mission to Greenland. So anytime
I'm talking about protecting the... Sorry, Christian, I wasn't clear. I'm talking about protecting the Arctic.
So we never have that, and we will never have it, because Canada is a very modest economy, and the Arctic is very vast, and the assets required are extremely expensive to be able to assert our sovereignty. That's why we entered into NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, which is effectively a binational functional arrangement to protect the Arctic together with the United States, including U.S. assets, to assert our joint interests. And so it means that if we can rely less on the United States, it means that Canada needs to be able to build more robust capacities. It needs to do that quickly, and that's going to be quite expensive in terms of both the equipment and the people at stake, but I would say that is still less expensive than the cost of effectively becoming a quasi-U.S. colony.
Also being reported as of yesterday is the fact that the Prime Minister's office is trying to weigh out, and yesterday we described it as being between a rock and a hard place. If he sends even a symbolic contingent of troops to Greenland, what is the U.S. response to that? And are we prepared to face more economic sanctions, as is promised to European countries, if Greenland does not come into the hands of the Americans? What's at stake for us? What is the Prime Minister trying to weigh out before we send those troops? Whether or not it was a pre-planned mission or not, troops on the ground from Canada to Greenland sends a message south of the border.
So first, there's trade-offs for the Canadian Armed Forces. The Canadian Armed Forces don't have spare people or equipment around, so it means Canadian Armed Forces is likely going to have to stop doing something, at least for the duration of that mission, in order to pick up that particular mission. So it's a bit of a zero-sum game. Then there's, of course, diplomatic trade-offs, there's economic trade-offs, there's political trade-offs, including those of how might the Trump administration react to sending troops to Greenland, to not purchasing all the F-35s that we had originally committed to, and all of this in the broader context of this very challenging world that we live in, and the efforts by the Prime Minister to try to diversify Canada's trade and political relationships. But in this particular case, I think what we're hearing in terms of during this mission is that Canada has a vital and existential interest, I would say in my interpretation, to stand with our allies to protect the sovereignty of Greenland, because imagine a counterfactual where the United States effectively takes control of Greenland. Now all of our air and maritime approaches to Canada would be controlled by the United States through the Arctic, through the Atlantic, and through the Pacific. And that cannot possibly in Canada's interest. So I would say this is an existential matter for Canada.
Something else to keep a close eye on is UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper calling on NATO to create what's being described as an Arctic sentry. So the special mission would see NATO members work together to defend the Arctic. How would an Arctic sentry work, and how would it differ from NATO?
Yeah, so I think there's two elements. One is the mini-lateral element, and we've already seen this emerging. So in 2024, for instance, Canada signed a maritime security partnership with Germany and Norway that Denmark then subsequently joined. Just in December, we saw the United Kingdom and Norway sign an undersea quasi-defense pact. So this is members within NORAD working together to secure their common interests. The Nordic 8, so working together, the Baltic states and the Nordic states, where Canada is an important observer state. But what's also at stake is how do we ultimately control the Arctic and defend the Arctic? And there's effectively, for that purpose, two Arctics. There's a European Arctic that is defended by NATO under the command of the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, who's an American, and Canadian Arctic that is defended by NORAD. So if NORAD is atrophying as an institution and sort of our joint arrangement with the United States, it is in Canada's interest to expand NATO's remit to the Canadian Arctic to turn this sort of arc of crisis into an arc of stability. But of course, that means Canada will need to commit very serious capabilities we don't currently have, and that the government would need to acquire and need to acquire quickly at very significant costs. So, but ultimately, I think this is probably the way forward in terms of convincing the Americans that we understand we all have a stake in the very hostile activity that Russia and China are engaging in with regards to the Arctic, and that we are committed to rebuilding those Arctic defense and, for instance, anti-submarine warfare capabilities that we let atrophy after the end of the Cold War.
Christian Leuprecht, professor at Queen's University's Royal Military College of Canada. Great to have you with us and have your eyes looking north, as is the rest of the world. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.